Cybersecurity. A bit about LACNIC and why we are talking about this. So we, as Ajmal had introduced us, we are one of the 5 regional internet registries. We distribute IP numbers, ASNs. But in addition to which, we participate in a lot of spaces that treat with ongoing concerns, and in particular now, the hot topic item of cybersecurity. So at LACNIC, we have a CSIRT, which has been operational since 2015, and that's a free service for all ISPs that belong to the LACNIC region, including the ISPs in Trinidad and Tobago. And from about 2016, we began informally participating in these sort of outreach instances, talking about public safety. Firstly, it was because of requests from the Government Advisory Committee at ICANN, and then we started meeting with global law enforcement in the wings of ICANN, and then we formalized this arrangement in 2019 onwards, to the extent that we have something called a public safety coordination group across the 5 regional internet registries in the world. So I would just like to share a couple of slides that will really summarize what we had seen just now by the presenters, and add a couple other tidbits from my end. And it's about developing a culture of cybersecurity. When we talk about culture of cybersecurity, what we're really talking about is having that right set of tools, protocols, and measures to protect against cyber crimes and mitigate against cyber attacks. And I found it very useful throughout the talk today. It's not a question about if you're attacked, but it's really a question about when. Another useful point here is that a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And I think Vincent touched well on the issue of making sure that an educated workforce is one of your strongest defense. We also talk about building human firewalls, which is a dedicated team of professionals that are equipped to treat with the implementation of security standards, and also have vigilant the protocols in place if something were to happen. So with this human firewall, that's one of your best defense. And of course, I think a recurrent motif during the last presentation was about collaborative security. It is not a one-man shop. It is not just the language for the IT security professionals within an organization. They have to be able to translate and interpret their information to the business heads and the other decision makers. And even within a private sector, you have to be able to cooperate and collaborate with other sectors if we're really talking about not just cyber defense, but also resilience, and ultimately from a user or consumer perspective, trust and confidence in our digital systems. So there are 2 focus areas that we touch upon when we talk about a culture of cybersecurity from LACNIC. I think a lot of it had been touched upon when we look at an organizational level, the technical knowledge among professionals, and then what these professionals need to do within organizations. But then there's also a general awareness, and that leads on to public policy concerns. And I will touch on that very briefly. These are some of the trends that we have to be aware of. There is a maturing or an industrialization of the cyber criminal environment. So whereas you would have thought that a threat actor would have been responsible from start to finish of a cyber attack, what you're seeing right now, in particular over the last year or so, since the arrest and disruption of cyber criminal gangs such as Revil and DarkSide, you're seeing that the cyber criminals, the seasoned ones, are starting to commoditize their tools and capabilities and make these available for people who are no way at all technical or qualified to undertake cyber attacks. So they've shifted a bit what they do within the industry, and that's because of the disruption of some of the major global networks. But as a result, you're seeing more cyber crimes taking place by even less qualified people. It's this idea of everything as a service. So you have ransomware as a service, malware as a service, phishing, spamming, scanning, phishing as a service, and it is intended for lesser skilled people to take up these things and create havoc. It's also important to note that these cyber criminal environments are highly organized, and I'll speak on that in a minute. This second topic is a reminder of one of the vulnerable groups. Earlier on, I think Ravi had mentioned the elderly as a vulnerable group in digital transformation. and that's in terms of using digital tools. I'd like to remind us that we also have children that are a vulnerable group when it comes to becoming victims of cyber-enabled or cyber-dependent, well, more so cyber-enabled attacks. And this term here, online child sexual exploitation and abuse, older narratives would have spoken about child pornography. What you will see from a legal lens is that more advocates push for the use of this terminology, which is a better representation as to the maliciousness of the act and activities that are happening through cyber tools, but through cyber tools, and therefore the sort of attendant consequences you like to see from that. And within the region, this comes from the Interpol Global Crime Report. Within the Americas, this is one of the top 3 concerns that we have, the increase of these materials being developed. Third point here is that according to the World Economic Forum, cybercrime and cyber insecurity remain both short-term, i.e. within the next 2 years, and long-term, within the next 10 years, risks to our development. And I mentioned ransomware as a service as one. We also have the uptake of AI-generated cyber attacks. I recently came across an article where they show that ChatGPT, there was malicious code being shared along that, which really takes another spin on how people get access to malicious tools. So the challenges are multifold, and there are different types of challenges. This is really a summary of everything. So we spoke about the gap in the workforce. Just to put a figure to that, it's now estimated at about 4.7 million professionals needed globally. Within Latin America and the Caribbean in particular, it's about a 17% shortage in this sector. And of course, this is a global problem. The IT security field is one with the most attrition, and it's something that we have to look at different ways of approaching it. Fortinet spoke about training people and making sure that expertise remain in-house. We have to look at remote work possibilities. We have to change the entire mindset about HR and how we actually contract security professionals in order for us to really come up with the right framework, whether it's consultancies, whether it's short-term consultants or retainers. We need to be able to act quickly to address this problem. Human error, unfortunately, still is responsible for the largest amount of data breaches. Approximately 95% of data breaches are attributed to human error. So that's where the awareness factor really comes into play, the changing of the passwords, the understanding as to why my data is important and valuable. And I think Vincent and another speaker, Anthony, had spoken to those specific points. The human error element is something that is significant. Cyber criminal groups are highly organized. If you had the social science fiction perspective of a cyber criminal being a aloof teenage hacker in a basement, that is no longer the case. They have PhDs. Recent reports on leaks actually that came from the Conti group show that the Conti has HR departments, they have employee of the month, bonuses, job appraisals. You had a lot of people who were not even aware that they were working for a cyber criminal group, and they are well remunerated and they work remotely. They have all of the advantages that an employee would want to have. So they are a lot more organized than the people who are there to address cyber threats and cyber attacks. And of course, the lack of preparedness. Ricardo had spoken about the Conti attack on Costa Rica. This disrupted over 27 government agencies, well, at least more than that. It, for instance, canceled over 30,000 medical appointments in the country, and it created a cause for a state of emergency, the first ever in the world to happen because of a cyber attack. But there are some opportunities that I like to focus on because they're always positives. One of which would be the US-led initiative on international countering of ransomware. And that is really where the US shows its leadership and gets together like-minded countries to take real steps, real directives towards mitigating ransomware, which is one of the biggest cyber threats that we have to date. We are seeing among non-state actors a lot of collaborations So collaborative security, again, is an important thing for us to look at. Collaborations among non-state actors. So for instance, there's now a cybercrime atlas that is appearing, supported by the World Economic Forum and organizations such as Microsoft and Fortinet. Secretariat will be backed by PayPal and other organizations to help law enforcement, private sector, everyone understand the dimensions of the threats that happen and the possible implications. The idea here is that information needs to be shared. And I think that had been mentioned by many of the speakers. Information needs to be shared in order to formulate the right responses to attacks, to threats when they happen. There's also, for instance, the example of the Cyber Helpline and Cybera. Cybera is a global cybersecurity firm. Cyber Helpline helps the victims of financial cyber crimes in the UK. And you're seeing that there are more and more collaborations and partnerships coming together to bring efficiencies and optimizations to what would have been the usual treatment of cyber attacks. I'm going to be just 1 minute again. Glenn McKnight posted in the chat the Global Forum of Cyber Expertise. I have the privilege of being on the advisory board of this global forum. It is a platform whereby all cybersecurity, public sector, government, civil society organizations come together and they try to optimize what they do in terms of awareness building and capacity building across the globe. So this is largely based, or was, I should say, largely based in Europe, started since 2016. And now with the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, we are seeing more hubs and regional approaches, particularly in the Americas, Africa, and the Asia Pacific. And in the Americas example, there's a new kid on the block in terms of LAC4, which is an example of European Union with Latin American and Caribbean cooperation. LAC4 is a cyber expertise capacity building hub based in the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic in the region has really shown a lot of leadership in what would be our capabilities to mitigate and to fight against cyber crimes. And that's even in terms of them having up-to-date national cybersecurity strategy, up-to-date cybercrime laws. And that's a sore point for me, but I'll get back to that. And also now the cyber capacity building activities. And then two other global trends I want to point you towards. That's the second additional protocol on the Budapest Convention to look at cooperation for electronic evidence. So imagine that at the time of the original Budapest Convention, even at the time of old cybercrime laws, we didn't have the dispensation of cloud services. So your email is based on a cloud service, your storage is based on a cloud service. You didn't have that set up. And therefore, one of the biggest challenges to modern cybercrimes is that over 90% of them have a transnational element, but our law enforcement and our judicial authorities do not have the right tools to be able to investigate and to be able to collect something as fragile and volatile as digital evidence. So the Budapest Convention already has 33 signatures to this additional protocol. The Budapest Convention in itself spans about 67 countries. But on top of that, more recently, we have within the UN system something called the Ad Hoc Committee to elaborate a comprehensive and international convention on countering the use of ICTs for criminal purposes. Informally, we call it the new UN Convention on Cybercrime. And this is where countries that are not part of the Budapest Convention, the likelihood of them implementing a UN convention will be a lot greater. And therefore, there is some sort of basic capacity to be able to do these things. And on the issue of crimes, whereas we spoke about data privacy, cybercrime law, modern cybercrime law is key. Reason being, if it is not a crime in my country, I can do nothing about it realistically from a legal standpoint. And that's part of the reason why we have this sort of impunity, this sort of lackluster approach, because there are no modern definitions to what occur here. And then the other point I mentioned, seeing that over 90% of these attacks are transnational, you need to have these modern definitions be harmonized or resemble definitions in other countries? If not, if it's not a crime in my country, I cannot help your country. So the importance of having modern cybercrime legislation and harmonized modern cybercrime legislation, which could be facilitated by either acceding to the Budapest Convention and or the UN Convention. These are some of the tools that we need to place to really make a dent to what happens on a cybercrime front. And of course, law enforcement has a lot of other challenges. A lot of the procedures of cybercrime are now filtered through cryptocurrencies, and that's in itself, and the unregulation of cryptocurrencies present other challenges. So I would just like to wrap up there, because I know that we can go on and on and on about this topic. And again, thanking the previous panelists for really showing us the entire landscape from a practitioner's perspective. My intention here was to just give a bit more of some strategic highlights that we do as LACNIC. And of course, be more than happy to continue having this discussion when it comes to what we want to see in Trinidad and Tobago, a resilient, cyber-resilient Trinidad and Tobago with trust and confidence in our systems. So I will stop right there. I see Dev is on.
Yes, Kevon, I don't know what I mean, what you said there was wow. It was very, very useful, and at least directed us to some of the international and regional legislation and acts and so on that can be enforced